When Clint Eastwood extended his hand to John Wayne at the Beverly Hilton Ballroom on February 5, 1973, in front of 400 Hollywood legends watching the Golden Globe Awards, the Duke looked down at that outstretched hand for 3 eternal seconds, then looked directly into Clint's eyes and said 3 words that would echo through Hollywood history. "Not like this." The room went silent. Clint's hand hung frozen in the air between them. Flashbulbs exploded. Whispers erupted like wildfire. The rising star of Dirty Harry stood there, publicly humiliated by the greatest cowboy who ever lived, and nobody understood why. But what John Wayne whispered next in those tense 30 seconds would either destroy Clint Eastwood's career before it truly began or prove that real respect in Hollywood is never given freely. It's earned through fire. Because hidden inside Duke's tuxedo jacket was a folded letter that had been burning a hole in his pocket for 2 years. A letter from a man Clint thought he'd never hear from again. A letter that detailed something that happened on a dusty film set in Spain 9 years earlier. Something Clint had buried deep and hoped would stay forgotten forever. What happened in the next 10 minutes on a private balcony overlooking Beverly Hills would force Clint to face the darkest moment of his desperate climb to stardom. And John Wayne's refusal to shake his hand wasn't about jealousy or competition or protecting his throne. It was about something far more important. A code. A responsibility. A test that every real cowboy had to pass before wearing the white hat. And Clint was about to discover that becoming a legend means nothing if you're not willing to face the man you used to be. If you want to see how this story ends, keep watching, because what John Wayne demanded from Clint Eastwood that night changed Hollywood forever. And hey, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching this from. We love hearing from you. But to understand why Duke refused that handshake, we need to go back to 1964. When Clint Eastwood was desperate, broke, and willing to do almost anything to escape television and become a real movie star. Clint Eastwood was trapped. 6 seasons on rawhide playing second fiddle as Rowdy Yates while the show's real star collected the glory and the paycheck. At 34 years old in 1964, Clint watched younger actors land movie roles while he stayed stuck in television westerns that critics called cheap entertainment for people who couldn't afford movie tickets. Studio executives saw him as a TV face, nothing more. But when Clint looked in the mirror, he saw something else. A leading man. A star. Someone who deserved more than playing sidekick to someone else's hero. Then came the offer that would change everything. An unknown Italian director named Sergio Leone wanted Clint for the lead role in a low-budget Western shooting in Spain. Every agent in Hollywood told him to say no. The script was weird. The budget was barely $200,000. The director didn't speak English. And nobody in America would ever see it anyway. But the offer included something Clint had never gotten before. Top billing. His name above the title. And a character called the Man with No Name who broke every rule that American westerns followed. He didn't talk much. Didn't smile. And solved problems with violence that would make John Wayne's characters look like Sunday school teachers. Clint said yes. He flew to Spain in May 1964 with a suitcase full of hope and a head full of dreams. What he found was chaos. The Italian crew spoke no English. Sergio Leone directed like a madman, demanding 40 takes of the same shot. The Spanish locations were brutal, 110-degree heat with no air conditioning. The horses were half wild. The stunts were dangerous. And the production was constantly running out of money, threatening to shut down every other week. Clint was desperate. This was his shot. His one chance to prove he could carry a film. His one opportunity to become the star he believed he was born to be. And that desperation made him push boundaries. Made him take risks. Made him make decisions that seemed necessary at the time but would come back to haunt him 9 years later when John Wayne pulled out a letter and asked him one simple question. Did you ever apologize? Because what happened on June 23, 1964, during a horse stunt would test whether Clint Eastwood understood what it really meant to be a hero or if he was just another actor playing dress-up in a cowboy hat. The 30th Golden Globe Awards brought together 2 different versions of Hollywood in the same glittering ballroom. Old Hollywood walked through those doors in classic tuxedos and respectful silence. New Hollywood arrived fashionably late with open collars and confidence that came from breaking all the old rules. And everyone in that room knew that eventually, these 2 forces were going to collide. John Wayne arrived at 7:15 p.m. with his wife Pilar, moving slowly through the crowd that parted for him like the Red Sea. He was 65 years old, fighting the lung cancer that would kill him 6 years later, but his presence still commanded respect from every person in that ballroom. The Duke was old Hollywood. A living legend. The man who defined American masculinity on screen for 40 years. And he carried himself like he knew it. Clint Eastwood walked in 30 minutes later with the confidence of someone sitting on top of the world. At 42 years old, he was Hollywood's hottest property. Dirty Harry had been the year's second highest grossing film. Play Misty for Me proved he could direct. High Plains Drifter was in post-production. Studios wanted him. Directors needed him. Critics who had dismissed him as a TV actor were now calling him the next big thing. Steve McQueen noticed them both and whispered to his date, "This is going to be interesting." Lee Marvin, who had worked with both men, positioned himself where he could watch what was about to happen. Because everyone knew the tension. Everyone had read the interviews where Wayne made comments about new actors who didn't understand the responsibility that came with wearing a cowboy hat. Everyone knew that Duke saw something in modern Hollywood that bothered him deeply. And everyone knew that eventually, Wayne and Eastwood would have to face each other. It was Clint who made the first move. After the first award was announced, he stood from his table and walked directly toward John Wayne's position near the bar. Witnesses later said Clint looked determined, like a man ready to address whatever problem existed between them head-on. Wayne saw him coming. The Duke set down his whiskey, turned slowly, and faced the younger man with eyes that had stared down outlaws in 100 films. Clint stopped 3 feet away and extended his hand with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Wayne," he said clearly enough for nearby tables to hear, "I wanted to introduce myself properly. I know we've never officially met, and I've always admired your work." It was perfect diplomacy. Respectful but confident. The kind of gesture that should have led to a handshake, maybe a photo, definitely a thawing of whatever Cold War existed between them. John Wayne looked at that outstretched hand for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then he looked up at Clint's face with an expression that somehow mixed disappointment and expectation. "Not like this," Wayne said quietly but clearly. "Not until we talk about Spain." The words landed like a bomb in the suddenly silent space around them. Clint's hand stayed extended for 1 more second before dropping slowly to his side. His face cycled through confusion, embarrassment, and then something like recognition. Because Clint knew exactly what Spain meant. He knew exactly which moment Duke was talking about. And he knew he was about to face something he'd been running from for 9 years. What happened next shocked everyone watching. Wayne gestured toward a private balcony, and Clint followed like a student called to the principal's office. What was said in those next 10 minutes would either end Clint's career or transform him into the man he needed to become. John Wayne led Clint through the crowd toward a balcony overlooking the city lights of Beverly Hills. Other guests watched them go. Steve McQueen later said he'd never seen Clint Eastwood look nervous before that moment. Once outside, Wayne closed the glass doors behind them, cutting off the ballroom noise. The city sparkled below them. Wayne turned to face Clint with intensity that made the younger man take an unconscious step backward. "I got a letter in 1971, Wayne said, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a folded piece of paper. "From a man named Carlos Rodriguez. He was the stunt coordinator on A Fistful of Dollars. Good man. Honest man. Worked with you in Spain back in '64. Wayne handed the letter to Clint, whose hands were shaking slightly as he unfolded it. "He told me something that's been bothering me for 2 years. Something I needed to hear from you before I could shake your hand in front of all those people down there." The letter was in Spanish, but someone had translated it into English on a separate page. It detailed an incident from June 23, 1964. A horse stunt gone wrong. A young stuntman named Paolo Dominici who warned Clint that one of the horses was injured and shouldn't be used that day. And Clint's decision to overrule that warning because he didn't want to lose a day of shooting. The horse went down wrong during the take. Paolo broke his arm in 2 places. And according to Carlos Rodriguez's letter, Clint had moved on to the next shot without even checking if Paolo was okay. "That true?" Wayne asked. His voice carried 40 years of authority. Clint stood there in silence, The kind of silence that confirms more than any words could. Finally, he nodded once. I was desperate, he said quietly. It was my first starring role. I thought if we lost the day, Leone would replace me. I thought I had to prove I was tough enough, professional enough, committed enough to carry a film. I thought. His voice trailed off. You thought your career mattered more than that kid's safety, Wayne finished for him. Clint didn't argue. Couldn't argue. Because it was true. Wayne stepped closer, and his voice dropped lower. Let me tell you something about being a movie star, especially a Western star. Kids watch our films. They buy toy guns with our names on them. They pretend to be us in their backyards. We're not just actors, son. We're selling them an idea about what a man should be. About what's right and what's wrong. About how to treat people when nobody's watching and nothing's at stake except doing the right thing. Duke paused, letting the words sink in. And if we're willing to hurt people to get ahead, if we're willing to put our own success above someone else's safety, then we're selling those kids a lie. We're teaching them that winning matters more than character. And I can't shake the hand of a man who teaches that lesson, no matter how many movies he's made or how much money he's earned. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Clint felt something breaking inside him. Not anger. Not defensiveness. Something deeper. Shame that he'd been carrying for 9 years without even realizing it. So here's what's going to happen, Wayne continued, pulling a small notebook and pen from his pocket. You're going to write down Paolo Dominis's last known address. Tomorrow morning, you're going to find him, wherever he is. You're going to look him in the eye and apologize for what you did. Not because I'm telling you to. Not because it'll help your career. But because it's the right thing to do and you should have done it 9 years ago. Wayne held out the pen and notebook. And when you've done that, when you've made it right, you call me. And then we'll talk about shaking hands. Clint took the notebook. His hand was steady now. He wrote down everything he remembered about Paolo. His full name. The city he was from. The stunt company Carlos had mentioned. When he finished, he looked up at Wayne with something new in his eyes. Not fear. Not embarrassment. Respect. This isn't about my career, is it? Clint asked. No, Wayne said simply. This is about making sure the next guy who wears the cowboy hat understands what it means to be a hero when the cameras stop rolling. Clint nodded slowly. And for the first time since stepping onto that balcony, he understood what John Wayne was really doing. Duke wasn't trying to humiliate him. He was trying to save him. Trying to teach him something that money and fame and box office success could never teach. That being a star meant nothing if you weren't a man first. What Clint did next would determine everything. And John Wayne would be watching to see if Hollywood's new leading man had what it took to earn the respect he thought he already deserved. Clint Eastwood didn't sleep that night. He sat in his hotel room with John Wayne's notebook open on the desk, staring at the name he'd written. Paolo Dominici. A man he'd hurt 9 years ago and then forgotten about because forgetting was easier than facing what he'd done. But John Wayne hadn't let him forget. And now Clint had a choice. He could ignore this whole thing, go back to his successful career, and pretend the confrontation never happened. Or he could do something that terrified him more than any movie role ever had. He could face his mistake and make it right. The next morning, Clint started making calls. He didn't tell his agent. Didn't tell his publicist. This wasn't about managing his image or protecting his reputation. This was personal. It took him 6 days to track down Paolo Dominici. The former stuntman had left the film industry after his injury, returned to Italy, and was working as a horse trainer outside Rome. When Clint finally reached him by phone on February 11, 1973, the conversation started awkwardly. Paolo barely remembered the American actor from that chaotic production 9 years earlier. But he definitely remembered the horse. Definitely remembered the broken arm. Definitely remembered being told the show must go on while he sat there in pain waiting for someone to drive him to a hospital 40 miles away. I was wrong, Clint said, and the words came harder than any line he'd ever delivered on screen. I was desperate and scared, and I put my career above your safety. I've carried that shame for 9 years, and I need you to know I'm sorry. Not because someone told me to apologize, but because you deserved better from me then, and you deserve to hear the truth now. Paolo was silent for a long moment. Then he asked the question that mattered most. "Who told you to call me?" "John Wayne," Clint answered. Paolo laughed, a sound that carried genuine surprise and something like understanding. "The Duke made you do this?" "No," Clint corrected quietly. "He gave me the chance to do what I should have done years ago. There's a difference." And there was. Paolo heard it. The difference between following orders and choosing accountability. The difference between managing damage and genuinely seeking forgiveness. His voice softened. "What do you want from me?" Paolo asked. "Nothing," Clint said. "I want to give you something. An apology you should have gotten 9 years ago. And if there's anything I can do to make this right, anything at all, you tell me and I'll do it." What Paolo asked for surprised Clint. He didn't want money. Didn't want favors. He wanted something simpler and somehow more difficult. "Come to Italy," Paolo said. "Meet my family. Let them see that the American actor who hurt me is a man who can admit his mistakes. That's worth more than anything else you could offer." 3 weeks later, Clint Eastwood flew to Rome during a break in filming. He spent 2 days with Paolo's family on their horse farm outside the city. He worked alongside them. Shared meals with them. Listened to Paolo's stories about his life after leaving Hollywood. And somewhere in those 2 days, something shifted inside Clint. He wasn't a movie star visiting a peasant. He was a man seeking genuine forgiveness from another man he'd wronged. And Paolo gave it to him. Not because Clint was famous. But because Clint had shown up. Had looked him in the eye. Had admitted the truth. Had made it personal instead of professional. On March 7, 1973, Clint called John Wayne from his hotel in Rome. "I did what you asked," he said. "And something more. I learned something." Wayne's response was brief. "What did you learn?" Clint's answer would become part of Hollywood legend. "I learned that being a star means nothing if you're not a man first. And being a man means facing the things you'd rather forget." There was a pause on the line. Then Wayne said 5 words that changed everything. "Then we should shake hands." When Clint returned to Los Angeles 2 days later, he found a handwritten letter waiting at his front door. The envelope was addressed in John Wayne's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a single page dated March 8, 1973, the day after their phone call. Wayne had written, "Most young actors today think being tough means never apologizing and never looking back. You proved that real toughness means facing what you did wrong and making it right even when nobody's watching and nobody will ever know except you and the man you hurt. That's the cowboy code I learned from Harry Carey and Tom Mix 40 years ago. That's the code I needed to know you understood before I could pass the torch. You did good, kid. Now don't screw it up." 2 weeks later at a small Directors Guild event, John Wayne walked up to Clint Eastwood in front of 50 other filmmakers and extended his hand first. "Good to finally meet you properly, Clint," Duke said with a smile that reached his eyes this time. They shook hands with genuine warmth. Everyone in that room understood something significant had happened, even if they didn't know the full story behind it. Over the next 6 years until Wayne's death in June 1979, the two men developed a respectful friendship that surprised people who knew about the Golden Globes incident. Duke attended the premiere of The Outlaw Jose Wales in 1976. Clint visited Wayne during his final illness in early 1979. And Wayne reportedly told friends that Clint gets it now in a way most modern actors never would. That endorsement from Hollywood's greatest cowboy star carried weight that influenced how critics and audiences viewed Eastwood's transformation from rebel actor to respected filmmaker. And years later, when Clint became known for his demanding but ethical film sets, for his loyalty to stunt crews, and for his fair but firm directing style, people who knew the story understood where it came from. John Wayne had given him a test that mattered more than any box office record. And Clint had passed it by learning that real strength isn't about never making mistakes. It's about having the courage to face them and make them right, even when nobody would ever know the difference except you and the person you hurt. When John Wayne refused to shake Clint Eastwood's hand that February night at the Beverly Hilton in 1973, it looked like an old legend trying to put a young upstart in his place. But it was actually something far more important. It was one generation refusing to let the next generation forget what really matters. Duke wasn't protecting his ego or his territory. He was protecting an idea. The idea that heroes in movies should be heroes in real life. That the cowboy code means something beyond the screen. That the men who wear the white hat carry responsibilities deeper than entertaining audiences and making money. Sometimes the people who refuse to give us what we want are actually giving us what we need. Wayne didn't owe Clint Eastwood that handshake. But he did owe the next generation of actors, and the kids buying toy guns, and the men who built Hollywood's golden age, the assurance that their values wouldn't die with them. He owed them proof that character still mattered more than fame. Because Clint learned that lesson and carried it forward into his own career as a director and mentor, he became not just John Wayne's successor but his spiritual heir. A man who understood that being a movie star means carrying a code that matters more than any award or paycheck. If this story moved you, if you believe real strength comes from admitting mistakes and making them right, hit that subscribe button right now because we're bringing you more untold Hollywood stories that will change how you see your favorite legends. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and share a time when someone's tough love pushed you to become better. Because sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in rejection. And the most important lessons are taught by people who refuse to let us off easy. That's not cruelty. That's respect. And John Wayne knew the difference.